Hi, fourth graders. If you recall from yesterday, we found out that Hachi's master never showed up at the train tracks. So that was very much unlike him to not show up. So we need to continue to read to find out what happened to the professor and why didn't he show up and where is he. Chapter 5. The next morning, Yasu and his mother arrived at the train station a little before 9 o'clock. The day was unusually warm and humid. It felt more like July than May. The air on the platform was heavy and still, and Mr. Takashwa untucked a white silk fan decorated with pink flowers from Takahashi. Mrs. Griffey can't read today. Mrs. Takahashi untucked a white silk fan decorated with pink flowers from her obi and waved it lightly in front of her face. I hope I'm saying these Japanese words correctly. I don't speak Japanese, and so I'm trying to read them to the best of my ability. Where are the professor and Hachi? Yasu asked his mother. I do not know, she said, searching the platform. Mrs. Takahashi's eyes swept over a sea of colorful kimonos in search of Professor's dark brown business suit. Maybe the professor is away, or maybe he is ill. Mrs. Takahashi looked around once more. I am sure he will be here tomorrow. Come, Yasu, here is the train. That afternoon, Professor Uno was not on the train that Yasu and his mother rode back to Shibaiway Station, and he was not on the platform when they stepped off the train. But Hachi was there, sitting in his usual spot, alert and waiting. This is most unusual. Now I am worried, said Yasu's mother. Let us wait for the next train. Mrs. Takahashi and Yasu walked over to a wooden bench and sat down. It wasn't long before the next train pulled into the station and discharged its passengers. Yasu and Mrs. Takahashi watched as a crowd of people hurried by. A young woman carrying a small child by the hand, high school boys in their navy blue school uniforms with gold buttons marching up the front of their jackets, and young girls with full serge skirts tied over their bright kimonos. Hachi sat where he was, sniffing the air, his eyes scanning the faces of the many people around him. Yasu and his mother searched the crowd as well, but they did not see the professor. They sat on the bench while two more trains pulled into the station. Many people departed from the trains and hurried past Hachi to get out of the station. But Professor Uno was not one of them. Come, Yasu, Mrs. Takahashi stood up. Let us speak to the station master. Perhaps he knows something. Yasu's mother bowed to Mr. Yashikwa. We are curious about Professor Uno, he said. He was not on the train today. A terrible thing has happened. Mr. Yashikwa removed his hat and spoke in a hushed voice. Professor Uno took ill while he was at the university yesterday. His heart stopped beating. Another professor who works with him came to my office and told me. Yasu's mother knelt down and took her son's hand. Yasu, the professor has died, she said in a small, gentle voice. But why? Yasu asked. He was not old. No one knows why it happened, said the station master. We will never see the professor again, Yasu whispered. As he stood quietly beside his mother, his chin trembled and his eyes grew moist. He would miss seeing Professor Uno every day. And what would become of Hachi? Yasu turned to the dog waiting patiently on the platform amidst a steady stream of commuters. Tears spilled down Yasu's cheeks. But what about... Yasu's words caught in his throat. I do not know what to do, said Mr. Yakashwa, looking at the dog. Hachi arrived just before 3 o'clock, as he always does. He does not know his master will never return. An idea took shape in Yasu's mind. Mother, he said, looking up at his mother, may we take Hachi home with us, please? I am sure he will not be any trouble, the station master said. He is very smart and well behaved. I have never heard him growl, and until yesterday I had never heard him bark. I must think about it, said Yasu's mother. She looked over at Hachi as he sat perfectly still amongst the mass of people swirling around him, and just at that moment, he glanced over his shoulder and looked at her. Then his somber gaze returned to the train tracks. Please, mother, Yasu said. I will take good care of him, I promise. Yasu held his breath as his mother thought. I will do it for the professor, she said at last. He was a very kind man. Oh, thank you, mother, Yasu said with a bow. Then he went over to the doorway. Here, Hachi, he called, slapping his thighs, but the dog did not move. Yasu ran out onto the platform. You are coming home with my mother and I, he told the Akitakin. Hachi stared up at Yasu, but at the sound of an approaching train, he fixed his eyes upon the tracks. Yasu stepped up right beside him and then began walking away. Hachi, heel! Yasu spoke in the stern voice he had heard the professor use when giving the dog a command. Hachi, heel, he said again, but Hachi would not obey him. I will get you something to lead him with, said Mr. Yashikwa. He disappeared into the office for a minute and then returned with a long piece of rope. He tied one end around Hachi's neck and handed the other end to Yasu. Come, Hachi, Yasu said. We are going home. He pulled at the rope, but Hachi would not budge. He is stronger than I am. You must help me, Mother. Yasu and his mother tugged on the rope. Hachi stood his ground. The station master gave them a hand, and at last, with great reluctance, Hachi began to move. He's not happy, Yasu said as they led Hachi out of the station and down the steps. He will get used to us, Yasu's mother said as they half pulled, half dragged Hachi away. All right, so Professor Uno has passed away. He has died. One of the context clues that was given back in Chapter 4 at the beginning of the story was how the professor was sweating profusely and he kept wiping his brow. That could have been an indication that something was wrong. And says that his heart stopped beating, so possibly he had a heart attack. So it won't be until after Christmas break, but we will come back and we will see what happens next in our book, Hachiko, and see if Hachi will stay with his master, which is now Yasu, the little boy, and his mother, or if he will continue to come back to the train station to look for Professor Uno. Have a good Christmas break, guys.